it is working. So nice. We are here today to take some part of your time to discuss new technology that we've been pushing on the market for specific reasons. So we organized a few question and responses between Ryan Hill and myself in order to provide you some content regarding why we think it might be an asset to get some new information related to the polyphenolic advancement of your fruit throughout the maturation. And hopefully, by the end of this little presentation, we may have a few questions that we try to address the best we can. So Ryan, are you here?
Yes. Hey, sorry about that little speaker difficulty. Okay, are we ready to begin?
Yeah, Ryan.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Today, we wanted to introduce this device to you all, and we're going to go through a few questions between Thibaut and myself. But please, while Thibaut and I are discussing this, think of questions you have, and you can type your questions into the bottom right of the screen. And then when we get to the end, we will go through and answer a few of your questions. So with that, Thibaut, thanks for being here this morning. We really appreciate your time. I'll start with a couple questions for you. We want to know, why Fruition Sciences chose to recommend this product, the Bacchimeter, and how can it help with ripening monitoring?
Yeah, so thank you, Ryan. Essentially, the reason why I personally became interested in ways to fine-tune a little bit our understanding of polyphenol is in direct relationship to climate changes. So I just wanted to ask if everybody is able to hear me. So you can just type in that it's okay, and I keep going. But eventually, what we've been observing, and that was first reported by the Australians more than 10 years ago, is that in the context of warmer temperatures, we observe a decoupling between sugar accumulation and color accumulation. And in that sense, knowing what's the time profile of color accumulation independently of sugar accumulation is becoming a strategic asset in many wine growing regions around the world in order to refine further the timing of harvest window, and also as a way to monitor the vineyard performances in terms of achieving proper maturation. That is, knowing whether or not there is a maturation stop while sugar and color are accumulating, avoiding color loss. Often we try to postpone harvest date decision because we have good climatic conditions. However, this might be done at the cost of a drastic color loss or not. And having an extra level of information to monitor how color is changing with time is an added benefit, particularly in the context of warmer temperature. So that's why, essentially, Ryan.
Nice. So with this device, why should people use this one? And is it about having a better idea of the quality within the vineyard?
Essentially, the sensor was conceived and created as a way to monitor phenolic maturity, using color not only for color, but color as a proxy for any flavonoids. That is also meaning tannins. So in the context of warmer temperature, what we've been observing is that sugar accumulation per berry reaches a peak while color keeps accumulating. And this is new. In the past, 30, 40 years ago, those two fluxes of sugar and color were happening relatively at a similar speed. Now, clearly, like if we look at Napa last year, there is up to 1 month of delay between the onset of sugar accumulation and the onset of color accumulation reaching its highest value. So this also means that sugar accumulation is becoming less and less pertinent to further support harvest date decision with data. So the peak of sugar accumulation is becoming just another phenological stage like veraison, bloom, and we propose to add in that timeline the peak of color accumulation as a way to better understand how people need to adjust the timing of their operations in response to vineyard performances. So essentially, if you want to have optimal quality, you might be interested in harvesting the fruit after it has accumulated the highest fruit color it can provide. Just keeping in mind that it's not color for the sake of color. I know that some people have already a very high potential color, so it's not really for them a matter of gaining an extra percentage of color density. It's more for them an ability to better refine how the block is responding to temporal changes that are driven by climatic events. It's also very important to keep in mind the recent Australian results coming from studies related to tannins extraction. In fact, color is helping greater skin tannin extraction, which means that if you get a fruit from which you extract color earlier in your tank, you also enhances your ability to extract skin tannin earlier, which means that you may review your maceration time in order to extract preferentially more skin tannin because you are helped by a greater color extraction, and getting maybe less seed tannin extracted because you are able to reduce a little bit maceration time when there is not too much alcohol in your must, and therefore modulate completely the profile of your tannin extracted in the wine, simply because you are using color as a mean to boost tannin extraction from the skin preferentially. And the last reason is because we know that wine color density is directly impacting the perception of the wine in the market and its price. So essentially, the Bacchimeter is a way to further control color accumulation rate until it reaches its highest potential. In other way, it's a tool to know when, in fact, the ultimate stage of maturation has been completed. That is the peak of color after the peak of sugar per berry has been reached. So that's why.
Okay, so it looks like it helps you to follow the maturity timeline. But
yeah,
does it also, what's that? Sorry.
Yeah, if you could put the graph of the maturity timeline, I could show people how it looks.
Yes, absolutely. Here we go.
Yeah, so here what you're seeing are two different curves showing as time goes by from August 15 to the end of September, how quickly skin color accumulation changes. You can see that here we reach 100% of potential anthocyanin. So the red profile is actually slightly richer in color, but that might not be what matters the most. What matters the most is that you see here a situation in red where the highest color potential is reached early August, whereas this other block keeps accumulating color up until the end of September. So you may understand how in that context, the polyphenolic maturation rate can be deciphered and revealed via color accumulation profile. It's also very interesting when you're trying to berry taste your grapes in order to refine when it is most appropriate to assess the flavor profile evolution. Of course, you may expect that aroma profile will change between the yellow point here at the highest value and the yellow point here while color is accumulating. But it might be interesting to guide where to go from a winemaker standpoint if you know that actually that same point that's reached here on 24th of September in block yellow was already reached by end of August in the block in red. So what I'm saying here is that this trend line can be used as a database to support winemaker assessment of other compounds such as aromas. So here is why.
Okay, nice. Also, I was going to check, does this also help with mapping the block level of maturity?
Yes. So on top of the benefit of Bacchimeter to find a point in time when a critical moment of the ripening is reached, we can use the Bacchimeter to actually track in space how color accumulation is varying. So instead of coming back to the same vines of your vineyard days in, days out to understand the speed at which chemical changes progress, you may take a snapshot of one day, exactly as you're showing here, where you're going to extensively sample vines. So on average, 150 vines will be sampled here per acre in order to produce that map that is here quite defined spatially, so that you can see here with my little cursor, areas where we have here a low in terms of color accumulation, and focus earlier in the season in areas where we have a potential for higher color accumulation. Then it's up to the winemaker and the wine growers and the vineyard managers to decide whether or not you want to carve out those specific areas based upon their ability to accumulate more color earlier. Because obviously, if color is a proxy for the polyphenolic profile, you may expect that the fruit composition and its carryover effect in the wine profile will be driven differently, whether you mix or you don't mix those two different areas, the red and yellowish versus the bluish areas. So that's how combining the time profile alongside with a snapshot of how the fruit composition color is distributed may help to further refine your harvest date assessment.
Well, also, how does this fit into the support of sampling and tasting?
So typically, when people relies more on flavor profile than on color profile per se, still the map tells you where to go in order to spot the most contrasted aromatic profile, while the time profiles tells the winemakers when to go. So together, the wine growers and the winemakers can define a sampling scheme that makes their time spent in the vineyard much more efficient. They know when it's best to go based upon the time profile, and they know where it's more strategic to go so that they don't lose time going to sites that are in fact redundant.
Okay. Well, great. So it brings them together more closely. Also, I was wanting to show this the side-by-side map and let you talk a little about it.
Sure, thank you, Ryan. So what you're seeing here is a very, very complex map. On your left,
I lost it, sorry.
It's fine. On your left, you may see areas where it appears on the rainbow map that very strong gradients, here you see the very dark blue close to the orange, are apparent. However, that might be too cumbersome for the wine growers to carve out such tiny variations that even if they are large in terms of fruit compositional differences, are small in terms of areas. So what we do offer in the 360 app is a way to conglomerate together areas based on how much they differ from the neighboring vines. And it's a way to assess whether or not, as you can see on your right-hand side, it's worthwhile to go through the pain of have some special assessment pre-harvest, where you will be carving out, for instance, this area, and here, based on your rainbow map, versus here, if I try to understand which areas is actually on the green, you'll see I am going to have to incorporate some of the red, and it's a way to better assess the benefits that are going to be expected from an extra slicing of the vineyard. So the two color maps is actually designed more for the wine growers or people having to do the painful work of selecting in and out some vines, whereas the rainbow map is more designed for the winemakers that must be as efficient as possible when they are tasting the berries. And together, those two maps provide a better assessment of how to carve out the vineyards. Is it justified to carve out the vineyards based upon the shape and based upon the size of uniform colored areas?
Okay. Well, great. And to the audience, if y'all do have any other questions, I see we have two already in line. Thibaut Joel Perez was curious about the units of measure or how quantifying these numbers. If you could maybe explain a little bit about that.
Okay, so while I'm explaining, I'd like Ryan to ask you if you could please put up the slide that we had prepared regarding unit conversions between the multiplex and the Bacchimeter. So it's an excellent question. What is changing here is the fact that Bacchimeter has stopped being too research focused, and with the price drops, we are also trying to make it much more easy to use in an industrial context. So in the past, we used to provide with multiplex data total anthocyanins expressed in milligrams per square centimeter of berry skin. As you can see here on the graph, this is reported on the x-axis. The nice thing with the Bacchimeter data is that we no longer use this unit because we found out that, in fact, it's more a research unit than it is a winemaker unit. The square centimeter of a berry skin isn't really easy to convey in terms of winemaker or wine grower decision. By merely focusing on potential anthocyanin, and you can see here that there is a relatively straightforward relationship between the two, it's possible to have a number that speaks to everybody while having a number that can still be related to what the old measurements obtained with multiplex were meaning. So from now on, we will only refer to color accumulation in terms of potential anthocyanin, but for the more research focused of you guys, you know that it derives directly from an estimate of the skin concentration in terms of color. Does that?
Okay. Yeah. And for Benjamin Leachman was asking about how it compared to multiplex. I hope that also tied into to that question as well.
Yes. Thanks for your question, but I think by answering Joel Perez's question, yes, I did address the same one. It's exactly the idea.
Okay, and also Jim Holmes was wanting to know a little bit more about the technology behind it.
Okay, so thank you for this question. The technology behind it is actually quite complex. Essentially, we are bombarding the skin with a very specific wavelength that is going to excite residual chlorophyll molecules that are in turn going to fluoresce. So the fluorescence is a biological phenomenon by which molecules are naturally emitting light. So what we are doing, in fact, is telling the skin that it should start to light itself up from within. And what we are measuring is how much of this light emitted back from within the skin out is actually filtered by the presence of anthocyanin. You know, anthocyanin have a cycle in their molecular composition, and this cycle is actually trapping light as it is re-emitted back from the berry skin. So by looking at the rate of light extinction, we can convert how much cycles related to anthocyanins are actually trapping the light. So it's essentially an optical measurement. So this is why it's a physical measurement. So, and these physical measurements relates directly to the ability of the plant to accumulate colors which directly ties with how the season and how the practices are modulating the fruit ripening profile. So with a very physical measurements, we are actually giving you a very biological response.
Great. And another question came through just regarding the operations of this device. How many data points was it for a map per acre? And then how are these measurements taken? Is it handheld or?
Yes, so thank you. I'm gonna start answering the second question. Yes, it is handheld. The reason why it's still controversial to mount it on a tractor, it is mounted in a tractor by some people, but this requires that the leaf covering the clusters be removed. So obviously, with a tractor, it's difficult. And that's why it's preferentially used today as a handheld device. Regarding the first question, when we are trying to create a color map with 150 points per acre that are systematically distributed according to a regular grid, we found that we get a good spatial representation that adding more points wasn't going to challenge further. Going a little bit under that will simply make your map resolution a little bit coarser, but can also be done. So you can make map with less point than 150 if you want. We just have a coarser spatial resolution. Or for an optimal rendering, we recommend 150. So this question is also making me feel that I should also speak about the protocol of measurement when we are trying to reveal the time profile, because that's slightly different. And to make a short answer, essentially the key idea is to always sample the same vines. So you may select 50 vines that are all together, or you may select 5 small islands along 2 vine rows of 10 vines each. But the key is to come back at each date over and over in front of the same vines, because you do not want to mix how the seasonal changes and how the passing of time is interfering with food composition with how the soil changes may affect that measurement. So it's very important that you be rigorous when creating a timeline by not mixing vines of high and low vigor in your samples, and making sure that you stick to the same vines. Of course, that does not apply when you create a map.
So is that the same cluster as well?
No, as long as you stick to the same vines, we are covered. So it might be different clusters. You may keep the same clusters if you want, but within the grape, within the vine, actually, the color distribution within the cluster is very important. And so as long as we focus onto one cluster, the next parameter factors of variations will be vine-to-vine variations, because there is already inherently within the same cluster so much berry-to-berry variations in terms of color.
Great. Okay, well, it looks like that is I think that's all the questions that we've had to come from the audience. If there's anything else you'd like to touch on before we go, we can do that, or maybe give the audience a few more minutes to see if they got any questions come up.
Well, something that I'd like to say that you might you might find interesting is to look at the relationship between what's happening before color accumulates, that is before veraison, and how the fruit is showing this trend. Typically, it's been reported that nitrogen deficit or water deficit will change the speed at which color accumulates, and also the ease with which color will be extracted into your final wine. So I think it's interesting to relate your fruit compositional changes, whether it's via sugar or via color with other environmental elements, such as the climate, and other physiological elements, such as plant response in terms of nitrogen accumulation, of water deficit. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is understanding the cause consequences relationships between what the vine did experience before veraison and during ripening with how the fruit composition is actually performing at the end. Because what you want to learn also is how to find out what is unique about your practices, what is unique about your site, what is unique about your season, in order to refine further your harvesting decisions. So, yeah, and if there is no other question, maybe the recaps of the benefits I could do is keep in mind that in front of those climatic changes, we need to have a better ability at deciphering the different stages the plant goes through as fruit ripens. So classically, we have 4 phenological stages. We have bud break, bloom, set, veraison, and then harvest could be considered the phenological stages. But on top of that, we have physiological stages, the moment in time when plant stops accumulating nitrogen, which occurs before the moment in time when the plant reaches its maximum transpiring leaf area. And then you have the moment in time when the fruit reaches its highest sugar concentration per berry. And then you have the moment in time when the color reaches its highest concentration per berry. So what we are saying is that we give you, with this new tool, an ability to find the date when the ultimate stage of fruit ripening is reached, because we know it's no longer sugar. And we know veraison and we know bloom are just very early time indicators of what's going to be the ultimate stage. So we give you the mean to find when this ultimate stage is going to be reached. And then the second benefit is we give you the mean to find what's the spatial distribution of the color as the fruit is going toward that stages at different time steps. So it gives you an ability to find the slow ripening areas, where they are, how they can be defined as a uniform area, from the fast ripening areas, what is their shape and size. That's it.
Great. One more question to add on to the protocol of sampling the clusters from Jim was that with outside clusters usually having less color than the inner, which side is best to sample of the vine?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You have actually 2 approaches. One approach focuses solely on the outside of the clusters, assuming that while there is a very important gradient between the inner and outer side of the cluster, there is also a very important gradient based upon the side the row is facing, east versus west or north versus south, for instance. So you may choose to calibrate your measurements by only focusing on the outer side of the cluster and making sure you sample alternatively one side versus the other side of the row. This is challenged by people who are actually harvesting row sides separately, and they may decide to sample only the west facing or only the south facing. And for those guys, they will do a mix of inner and outer side of the sample. So it all depends on what kind of harvesting decision you can afford to make. And of course, if you want to do a mix of everything, you can, but we found that it's better to stick to a more simple sampling protocol. And by focusing on the outer side of the cluster and mixing both row sides, that's how we capture the greatest variability.
Great. Okay, well, that looks like all the questions answered. So, Thibaut, again, I want to thank you for taking this time this morning, your evening time. I know you've been traveling a lot, so thanks a lot for doing this with us. Well, we may have one more question coming through, but just to also remind the audience, if after this is over, you have any more questions, please feel free to just email us anything that comes up after we've gone off. But we'll wait for this last question. So
yeah, I'd like to add, Ryan, that if you want, if any attendees would like to know more, please contact Ryan, because he will relay to our team and we will be happy to answer your question. I think it is a great technology considering the impact that warmer temperature are having on plant response and its consequences on fruit.
Great. And Joel is just saying that they're excited to start using theirs when they receive it. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Joel, for your enthusiasm.
Happy for that. Great. Yeah. So absolutely, people feel free to reach out to me. It's Ryan@fruitionsciences.com, and I'll be happy to take any questions and get more information to those that need it. So I just want to say thanks again to all our attendees, and that wraps it up.
All right.
Thank you all.
Have a good day. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.